Good morning. So today is Saturday, May 30th. Just waking up, drinking my coffee this morning. I was thinking about something that came across my mind, a thought that or a memory that I have. When I was younger, I used to go and visit my grandparents quite a bit, and I was about, I don't know, somewhere around 5 years old, maybe 6, maybe even 4. And in the small town of Morenci, my grandparents lived. It was a short walk uptown from their house. It wasn't actually too far. I mean, it was a good distance for, somebody in their prime, in their older age and everything, but it was not too bad, And my grandmother seemed to like to do it a lot because that was the only real way she could get around, unless she actually asked my grandfather to take her anywhere because she didn't have a license to drive. So, but we used to have a dime store uptown, and we used to go up there, and she'd always get, knitting and sewing supplies, and they'd always have toys and stuff, and I'd get a toy. And one time when we walked up there, we were having a conversation about the idea that my grandmother wanted to make sure that when they passed, I was taken care of. And we discussed how she wanted to start a bank account for me that was in her name and mine, so when they passed, I could be able to access that account. Well, we went up to the local bank and tried to do it, but because my grandmother didn't have my personal information, she'd have to ask for it from my mom. And that would kind of raise a red flag with my mom, because my mom would wonder why my grandmother's asking for my social security card, my birth certificate, stuff like that. And unfortunately, she wasn't able to open the account, but we discussed the idea of it, and that, waiting for 20 years from that time, how much it would be. And then my grandmother was thinking more long term, and she said something about, well, why don't you wait till you're 40? This way you got something to, settle on. And I told her that was a good idea and everything, and it sounded like it was a good way to go, because it would make it to be more money to come to me in the long run. And I had mentioned the fact that I'm like, well, what if something happens in my life that I need the money when I'm in my 20s? I mean, granted, yes, I'd only get a little bit, but it would be enough to be able to give me a nice little boost from that situation. And we had discussed it and everything, and when we got uptown, found out that she couldn't open the account with my name on it right away, to where she could actually deposit like $20 in it. And on the way back, we discussed some of the things about what we could come up with to be able to allow my mom to give her the information she needs to be able to open the bank account. And my grandma was like, we'll just worry about it another day. I'm like, all right. And then I said something about the house, I think, that they lived in. And I said, well, what about just leaving me the house? That way I know I've got security with shelter for, my life and everything. And I also mentioned the fact that I had a feeling that when I was older and they had passed, that my grandparents' house wouldn't stay in the family. And I voiced this to her and asked her about it, and she kind of was taken aback by it. She's kind of shocked that I even came up with that kind of logic and everything. And it was just kind of crazy, that I had kind of come up with that scenario at that age, and try to offer a solution to keep the house in the family, but being at that age, not having, the complete societal thought process way of doing things and everything. And I was able to come up with that kind of thing to where I felt like if it was going to be left to somebody else, that it would end up being sold out of the family, and it wouldn't be in the family no more. And I told her I would like to keep it in the family if possible. So yeah, it was kind of crazy that I could think about that and remember that, walking uptown with her and just walking down the sidewalk with her, holding her hand, enjoying the nice day and everything, and just enjoying her company, because, it was really sweet how my grandma was to me. She always made sure that I came over, I was fed. She looked out for me in a lot of amazing ways that kind of made me to who I am today, actually. She's a little old Irish woman, didn't really cuss, so if she cussed, you pissed her off. But, it's just nostalgia thinking back to that time, because I didn't get to have a lot of time as an adult with them because they passed as I was getting into my early 20s, from my late teens to my early 20s. They missed a lot of my life growing up, but then I thought about the idea of conversating with my grandfather when I was about 15, 16 years old, somewhere in there. And he had mentioned that he wanted to leave me his army uniform, his dress uniform from the military from World War II. And I looked up at him. We were playing Chinese checkers at the time. I looked up at him and told him, I said, honestly, I don't feel like I would be able to keep it in pristine condition, because I told him, I said, I can see where my future's heading right now, and it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to maintain keeping it and having to lug it around with me consistently all the time. So that was something my grandfather even showed concern of, wanting to leave me something from them, and me basically voicing the knowing of my life, which was kind of strange because, at a young age, they say that we still obtain higher plane existence knowledge, and as we develop on this plane, we tend to forget it little by little. So if you talk to a child that is like 3, 4, 5 years old, you can get them to answer some pretty crazy questions that you wouldn't think they would be able to answer, and they will answer. So like a perfect example would be if you have a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, and they talk pretty good and vocalize and conversate with you, ask them, why are you here? Just that one question. See what their answer is. I guarantee you they'll shock you. I don't know why those things came up today while I'm just sitting here drinking my coffee. But, it's the nostalgia of, thinking back to time I got to spend with my grandparents. My grandparents were something else, that's for sure. My grandfather, he was a stubborn old man. Till up to the day he died, basically. He was very good with cars, always liked tinkering on them. He taught me a lot of stuff that I know about cars, even though it's very little. He tried to get me into cars and everything, and I was kind of into them, but not like he was, I always liked the El Camino that he had. He did have a old Ford, I think it was an old Ford truck, like a 19 40s, 50s style type truck. It was pretty cool. I always admired those vehicles, and that was one way that we clicked when it came with cars and stuff. But I mean, it was just always being over there at my grandparents' house and hanging out with them and watching TV with them and doing things with my grandma, going places with my grandfather, going and hanging out in the garage with him, while he's working on cars and stuff, and working out in the garden, doing that kind of stuff for my grandmother. He'd rototill it, and my grandma would go out and plant stuff in the garden, and while she's planting, I'd be playing in the dirt with little Matchbox cars. Yeah, if anybody doesn't know what a Matchbox car, those are little cast iron car lookalikes. So, yeah, I've, just kind of thought about that and was thinking about it, and I was like, I should talk about that, because it's something we do a lot in our lives is, think about past things in our life, and it creates a bit of nostalgia in an aspect. It brings up feelings, emotions, thoughts, ideas, concerns, all kinds of stuff. And we have to acknowledge these. We have to acknowledge them because they're not insignificant, because if they were insignificant, we wouldn't think about it, or we wouldn't ask ourselves that, or wonder something, or try to think about the whole situation from beginning to end and, fill in the whole story instead of just bits and pieces of it. It's just the way that we are supposed to operate, and our abilities with our brains to be able to do things, And this gets into like psychology and just kind of all type of stuff where I don't have a lot of knowledge of, so I'm not a psychiatrist or anything. Anything I put online, it's because of my own experience, my own breakthroughs at points, you could say, where, I took a really shitty situation and turned it around, or was able to analyze the situation to see where it was heading and realize that this is not where I wanted to go in that path line. So I was going to get out of that situation before I, walk that path. Those kind of things. This is how open-minded and objective people, really operate. And a lot of times, people will look at them funny because the way they operate looks completely different on the outside. Someone that's open-minded and objective, they might do things spontaneously, they may take a risk that a lot of people won't, or they constantly take a lot of risks, which a lot of people won't. And you have to remember that open-mindedness and thinking objectively allows you to evaluate the situation and develop a visual of the paths that can be taken from that situation, whether they be good or they be bad. And a lot of times our own minds will automatically shift to the bad experience of the situation instead of seeing the lighter side of it, the good thing that comes out of it. And a lot of things in life never have a good outcome depending on the situation, but it's just that aspect of knowing, look, this spectrum is negative, this spectrum is positive. And if you're only seeing this side of the spectrum, what's that tell you about how you look at things? Question yourself, question your thought process. Ask, why did I look at this as a negative? Why did I do this? Why did I say that? Ask yourself, if you're in a situation where you're arguing with somebody, did they react the same way I would? If that was me, put yourself literally in their shoes. See the situation from their point of view. You know, would you have acted the same way they acted? Or would you have acted a different way? Or, you know, would you say what they said? Or do you think they acted correctly to what you said or did? And if they were in your shoes, do you think they would have said what you said or did at that point? You know what I mean? It's that perspective of the situation that you have to put yourself into. The only thing about it is you have to let go of the bias. I don't know what the heck my dog's doing today. He's being a goofball. You know, you have to let go of that biased opinion of it. And usually these biased opinions go from experience of first person. So basically you went through it. You were a third party in a situation that saw somebody go through that type of situation, and they were close to you, dear to you, you cared about them, loved them, you know, family, friend, whatever, you know, or you're holding a biased opinion because you listen to what you're told to know and understand about something. So basically you're being conditioned to think a certain way, and this is a societal thing. So society says that you know, in public view everybody's treated the same, but yet behind a so closed door we treat each other differently because of viewpoints, color of our skin, the way we look at life, the way we do things in life. You know, it's just division, separation. But, you know, it's just that whole thing coming together, you know. And I haven't done a conversation video like this in a while. You know, and I feel like it was time to redo one again. And, you know, I wasn't sure on what kind of content to make and everything. And then I'm sitting here drinking my coffee this morning, and all of a sudden I think about it, and I'm like, you know, that's actually a decent video, because, you know, we all go through nostalgia, thinking back about, you know, time spent with a loved one that's no longer here, you know, conversations you've had, places you visit, things you've done, you know, kind of things like that. And, you know, it brings up emotions, feelings, and it's hard to escape those when they come up, because, you know, it hits you hard thinking about a person that you haven't been able to talk to in a long time, you know. And just being able to, you know, think about those kind of things, you know, it's nice, you know. Remember how they smiled, how they always said your name when you were doing something goofy or funny or something, the way they talked to you, the way they listened, the way they accepted you for who you were. You didn't have to be anybody but you around them, and they loved you for it. You know, that's the type of people that we miss, you know. Those are the people that we tend to lose in our lives, when they could have been a huge strength for us along the road, that could have made a difference in your life at one point, you know, kind of thing. That's just my way of looking at it, because, like I said, you know, my early 20s, I lost both my grandparents, you know, and unfortunately, you know, I might be somebody a little different than I am today, because if my grandparents were able to live up until my mid-20s, or even to my early 30s, would have been good. You know, I just thinking about it, and it's like, wow, it's been this long already, you know. I'm 46 now, almost 4 years away from being 50 years old. And I'm sitting here thinking about something that happened when I was around 5, 6 years old, 15, 16. So I'm looking at 40 years back to the conversation I had with my grandmother about leaving me an inheritance. And then 15, 16 years old. So what's that, about 30 years back, thinking about my conversation with my grandfather over a game of Chinese checkers, to where I tell him that I think one of my uncles would take better care of his uniform than I would. And honestly, I told him, I said, I might be going through a tough time in life. I might want to try to sell it, and I don't want to do that. So I think to keep it in the family, you might want to give it to somebody else. So, but yeah, you know, I mean, that's how we do things in life, you know, I mean, and thinking back to it, you know, I didn't think nothing of it at the moment, you know. I didn't believe that it was actually going to happen, but I knew it was a possibility, you know. I mean, even at a young age, I had very good pattern recognition, you know. Somebody could tell me their side of a story, and all I had to do is say, well, what did they do? What did they say? And they tell me what they said or what they did, and I would be able to formulate a perfect big picture of the situation to where they didn't have to tell me the other person's side of the story. I could already give them advice or ideas on ways to solve the problem, fix the problem, you know, decide if they need to walk away from the problem, whatever, kind of thing like that. And, you know, I just never really gave it much thought throughout the years of growing up that from a young age, I already knew what my life was going to be, you know. I already knew that I would struggle. I knew that I was going to see a lot of hardships, a lot of heartbreaks. I knew it. Don't ask me how, because I couldn't tell you, you know, and I'm still kind of trying to figure out exactly how I was able to pull that off at 15, 16 years old, you know, being the fact that that's a long time to break away from your higher self, spiritual contract, knowledge and stuff that you bring with you when you are born into this existence, into the 3D, that you are slowly losing that knowledge as you develop through the years. And once you start getting into that, you can see how the fact that, like, children, when they're young, they're innocent, you know, they move in this world in such a different way than adults, you know. New experiences, seeing new things, touching, smelling, tasting, you know, this is all, you know, what life is about, is that experience of experiencing life. And a lot of people take that for granted, unfortunately. But as kids, you know, that's the way we need to operate our whole life, is that whole new experience, you know, and delight and enjoyment and awe in the experience, because that's the way kids are, you know. And we should, you know, really start figuring out a way to nurture that in children, instead of training them what to think. instead of how to think. But that's just me. Sitting here this morning drinking my coffee, having these thoughts, and I figured I'd make a video talking about it because, you know, it's something that means a lot in my life. You know, my grandparents played a large role in my life up until my grandmother died. You know, they were somebody that I always could count on to be there if I needed to talk to somebody, or I just needed to get away from the house, you know, and go do something, you know. I lived a few blocks away from my grandparents' house, so I could walk over there anytime I wanted to, basically. All I had to do was just let my mom and dad know, hey, I'm going to Grandma and Grandpa's, I'll be back later, and be gone. And go visit with them and hang out and just feel at peace, you know. Feel welcome, wanted, you know, like I wasn't a burden. And, you know, it was fun because it always seemed like my grandma and grandpa's place was always the place, happening place, because most of the time, every time I'd come over, I'd have an aunt and uncle visiting or something. Cousins would come over after the first ones got born after me, because I'm the oldest of all my cousins. Let's see. Neighbors, you know, I live next to some pretty cool people. They had a little dog called Monroe. Cute little buddy. He had big floppy fuzzy ears. I can't remember what kind of dog he was, but he was a full-on black little dog. And I mean, literally stood a foot and a half from the ground. Totally all the way to his back. He wasn't a very big dog, but he was a fun dog. I used to play all the time with him, chasing him around the yard, him chasing me around. Sitting on the front porch with my grandparents, sitting on the swing, sitting in the chair, talking to my grandpa, you know, just enjoying the weather and everything, you know. And then, like I said, you know, family coming by and visiting, so I always got to see them. Let's see, one of my aunts, my youngest aunts, lived with them for quite some time into I think it was my early teens, maybe. So she was there a lot when I'd come and visit. Always loved visiting with her. It was always fun because she was the one family member that was close to my age. So I always felt like a little bit of a connection to her, that, you know, we would have a better understanding of life together, and the way we look at things might actually kind of coincide a little bit, to where she might see my point of view a little easier than everybody else, and I can see her point of view because I'm in that age with, you know, close age range with her, that I can kind of resonate with what she's going through or dealing with or something, you know, and everything like that. But you know, it's crazy how things work out, and, you know, it's just how crazy, in a blink of an eye, you know, 20 years can pass. And the funny thing is while you're living it, it doesn't seem like it passes very fast. You know, I mean, it might sometimes, like, a year goes by pretty quick, to where it's like, wow, man, that was a blur. Or a month or a week, you know, will go by pretty quick. But it's just how quickly it runs together, that eventually, you know, you blink and then you're in your 40s. Or you blink and then you're in your 30s. You know what I mean? But knowing, you know, that I had these times with my grandparents is something that I hold dear to. You know, it's a special memory that I have for them, and nobody can take that away from me. You know? I mean, they can take anything away from me. You know? Anything they want. but they will never take that, you know. And I cherish it because it's one of the most fondest memories that I have of being around my grandparents was, you know, hanging out, just enjoying their company, taking walks with my grandma, playing Chinese checkers with my grandfather, watching him work on cars out in the garage, you know, helping him sometimes. Those are the things that matter, is the time spent with loved ones, you know. Ones that don't make you feel like you don't matter, you know. I mean, because everybody's got these kind of family members, you know, the ones that just won't ever reach out to you to see how you're doing, you know. The ones that do, you know, that, you know, show they care. Very far and few these days, you know. And I get it. Life does tend to throw curveballs at you to keep you busy quite a bit. But that's where you have to take time and make time for people that you care about, you know. Nowadays, it's everybody for themselves. Just the small things sometimes help, you know. It doesn't have to be large, and that's people's misconception of helping people these days, is everybody thinks, oh, well, they expect me to go above and beyond and do this and do that. No. Lower your expectations of what other people expect of you, and you will never be disappointed. It's really what it is, you know. I mean, have you ever saw that, you know? You go into a situation and you have expectations of somebody, or you build expectations of somebody, and then they don't live up to those expectations. So something that mattered to you now makes you feel disappointed because it should have mattered to them, and your expectations would put that in play, that it should matter to them. And because they blew it off, they didn't think much of it, they didn't consider it to be something important for them at that time, they disappoint you in the situation. Yeah. But anyways, so it's a beautiful day. As you can see, the sun is shining and everything, and I'm seeing a lot of birds around, but unfortunately it's pretty windy outside right now, so I'm just sitting inside, waking up with my coffee. And like I said, I was thinking about this and couldn't get it out of my mind for a minute there, and I was like, alright, I'll just make a video, this way I get it out. So that's today's video. I'm trying to get my YouTube channel subscriber count up, see what we can get it to. So I'm hoping somebody sees this video. Do me a favor and big one, and share one of my videos that you like, that you think other people would like, and tell them to subscribe to help me grow my channel a little bit, please. I mean, I'm not looking to monetize my content, because the last time I tried monetizing my content, I got almost right there and then got hacked. So I'm not going to deal with that anymore. No point in trying it, you know, no reason to. But yeah. So anyways, I think this would be the end of the video. I'm probably going to do some editing on it just to cut out a lot of spaces, pauses, and stuff like that in the video. But, you know, like I said, you know, thinking about things in the past, you know, it's not bad to think about that stuff. Just don't dwell on it, you know. It's not something you can change, redo. So, you know, let it be what it is, you know. And if anything's supposed to be an outcome from it, let it. Just let it happen. Have faith that if something's being hidden, truth will come to light. You just got to believe and have faith that you're doing things in your life that you're supposed to be doing. You're doing things the way you're supposed to be doing them. And you're right in doing these things because guess what? It's your life. Nobody can tell you how to live your life except you. You know? People can try to give you advice, but when advice sounds like more of a command to do it, you tend to steer away from it a little bit. So if you try to give advice to somebody, don't command them. Guide them. Till next time. Peace.